Welcome to the Operator Lab podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Seib, and on this show, we sit down with founders, operators, and business leaders to break down how real businesses grow, scale, and run more effectively behind the scenes. Today, I'm joined by Richard Broo, founder of True North PMP Consulting. Richard brings over 40 years of leadership experience helping organizations from Fortune 500 companies to startups recover struggling projects, improve predictability, and eliminate costly execution problems. Richard, glad to have you here.
Ethan, pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Richard, you've seen firsthand why even major projects with strong funding can go off track, and more importantly, how to fix them. Before we dive in, give us a quick snapshot of who you help, the problems you solve, and what your mission looks like today.
Well, my name is Richard Broo, and my company's True North PMP Consulting. We focus on small to medium-sized businesses anywhere from 50 million to 750 million, roughly about 25, 30 employees up to 250. And we concentrate on these businesses to help them for two reasons. One is to optimize their project management process and or their new product development and commercialization process. The reason why we focus on these accounts is they seem to be the type of companies that don't have either the resources or the expertise to deal with major project issues, whether that be projects being over budget, behind schedule, creeping scope, or having risk issues. And our mission really is very simple. We want to help these companies to reduce costs, cycle time to revenue, risk and waste out of their project management and new product development systems. And the reason why I want to do that is it brings more predictability, more sustainability, and more profitability to these companies.
Awesome. Good insight there. Richard, one of the biggest questions that you raised for me is why do well-funded projects still fail? And what warning signs do leaders most commonly ignore that hurt overall business predictability and consistent growth?
Well, most projects fail at the intersection of people, process, and process discipline, meaning there's no one thing that will derail a project. It's a combination of things. And even the best funded projects, whether it be financially funded or capital or human resource funding, could fail. For instance, I'll take people. You may have the wrong skill sets on your team. You may have dysfunction within the team where people are jockeying for a position or where one party feels this is not the way I would like to see this project run, so they'll passively, aggressively disengage. Those problems can occur. On the process side, there's basically three ways to approach a project. It's called agile, which is where you're trying to figure out something that's never been done before. There's waterfall, which is cookie cutter, very sequential. It's like building a car. It's the same car after another coming down the line. And there's hybrid. There's a combination of the two. So on process, if the company, no matter how well they're funded, no matter how good the resources are, if the resources in the process don't mesh, you're not going to get the results that you want. Meaning you can't apply agile very effectively to a waterfall type project, and you sure as heck can't apply waterfall 100% to an agile project, but you can have a hybrid of the two, which is a little bit more intricate. So that's the process side. Then there's the discipline side. The process discipline side is you have a project management plan. You should be playing that project management plan unless there's something structurally wrong with what you've planned. But for some reason, someone on the team or the team decides we're going to go a plan on this particular aspect of it because we believe this is something that the customer might like. For instance, let's say we're developing a computer mouse. And you say to me, Richard, I want a right and a left click button and a wheel in the middle. I want a two-tone black and gray. Those are your specifications. Well, the team and I say, it'll be really neat. We think we can put a little light in this thing so you can work in a dark room. Well, we come back to you and you say, I never asked for that. I mean, it's a nice to have, but that's not what I wanted. Well, we went rouge to go do that thinking, well, you would want that. So you have to be, when you look at failure, you need to break it down into those categories of the people side of it. What's failing on the people side? What's failing on the process side? Am I using the right process to get the end result I'm looking for? And then there's the discipline. Well, if I have put together a project plan then what am I not following? What am I not doing to that plan that is causing this to go array? So those are the three things that I look for when I get called in on a project that's failing.
Hmm. That's really interesting. So it sounds like what you're saying is, the money alone, whether it's a well-funded project or a startup, the money alone isn't enough to protect a business if the leadership is missing early signs of this.
Right. Why do they miss these early signs? Well, I grew up in the automotive industry, and every 30 days we would sit down with the chief engineer on a car platform and we would present what has happened within the last 30 days. That's a 30-day period where we did work which that chief engineer may or may not have wanted or have liked. And so if leadership is really keen on making sure things are running the way they should, there should be a cadence for project reviews, whether you call them stage gate reviews or project reviews. But the more you will get together, meaning I like to tell my people once a week, you should at least be down once a week going over the project, going over the scope, the schedule, the budget, the risks, everything associated with that project, so that everybody's calibrated every 7 days about what's going on. And if something is going to become out of calibration, you're going to catch it right away. You're not going to wait that 30 days or so to find out, well, this is not what I expected, or this is not what I wanted. So, and that's the people side of it. That's part of the people and the process side of it.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like you just touched on that a little bit, but yeah, my following question with that is, where do leadership teams most commonly misread what's happening before things start slipping?
First one is scope. You and I have a vision for what the product wants to be. You're the customer, I'm your supplier. It's very important up front in a project that you plan that scope very clearly and you decide what is in scope and what is out of scope, and you commit that to a piece of paper. Beyond that is, I'm going to ask you, why are these things important to you that you want in scope? What value do they create for you? The things that are out of scope, why don't you want them? So I'm very clear about why we should never go into that area. I'm going to talk to you about all your assumptions and constraints around that. And I'm going to talk to you about the risks now. You've told me what you want, we've defined it, but here are the risks, Ethan, that you are going to, potential risks that you can encounter by what you're asking to be done here, so that you're fully aware of what you're asking for. Is it doable? Yes, but here's the risks that we're going to be cognizant of along the way. I tell my clients, you commit that to a piece of paper. You and I would sign that piece of paper. You say, Rich, why would I do that? I just told you what I wanted and it's on a piece of paper. Well, I'd say, Ethan, the reason why I'm doing this is a living document. It starts the whole planning process. And so every time you and I have a meeting or our teams have a meeting, this is the first document we're going to review to make sure that we're still calibrated on what you want for a scope. The other thing why they miss it is risk. A lot of companies, some, not a lot, but some will start a project and they won't think about the risks involved. Well, if I want to do this, what are some of the risks? Whether it's a supply chain risk, a personnel risk, a capital equipment risk, but what are these different risks that could interrupt the progress of this project? And what would trigger that? A lot of companies don't think about the trigger, they think about the risk. And what I coach them on is, yes, you need to identify the risk, then the trigger, because if you can see what that trigger is and keep your eye on that trigger, as it's being pulled, you will have a response for that trigger. For example, if you and I were in the plastics business and we had to buy tool steel, and our supplier said, there is a chance that tool steel may go up in the third quarter by 25%. Well, now I know the trigger, okay? You've already told me there's a trigger with 25% behind it. I'm going to be speaking with my tool steel vendors so that before that trigger gets pulled, I have options to avoid that 25%. So those are the things why I think management misses it. They don't define scope well enough up front, or they assume that you and I assume that what you want, but assuming's a problem because I haven't committed that on a piece of paper to you that we both agree on. And then the risks. Okay, if you don't look at the risks deeply enough, they become issues, and that's where the derailments start to happen. a risk becomes an issue and you say, I have no plan for this issue at the moment. I've got to figure it out. No, you need to think about that way up front because those two things, scope and risk, they will, you'll fall off your chair quicker than they can hit you.
So it's really about seeing beyond the surface progress and understanding what's actually happening underneath.
Exactly.
Richard, in your experience, do most of these major delays come down more to people, process, or leadership discipline?
I see a little bit on the leadership side. And I just talked a little bit about this where you're my customer and we're going to agree to do something, but I don't do my due diligence well enough to make sure I fully understand what you're asking of me and my company. So that is a process issue. It's a people issue too, because it's my responsibility to provide you that service to make sure I fully understand what you want so you're not surprised or disappointed. Part of it is in the planning. Again, I talk about scope, but I also talk about risk. Uh, if we don't take a look at risk, and every project, however big or small, is going to have risk. If I don't understand the risks, if I don't understand what's going to trigger them to an issue, if I don't have a response for them before they become an issue, then I'm not doing my job for you as my customer. And then I think lastly, it's just a discipline. People by nature want to do what's right and what they feel the customer wants. But you in project management, if you really follow the law of what they call the product management body of knowledge, you only do what the customer wants, nothing less, nothing more. And it's when we get those ideas in our head, well, we can do more, even with the budget and everything. Let's just go do this. Well, wait a minute. The customer did not ask for that. So let us not go there because we will find other issues that we probably haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, I think most people immediately think budget overruns on this topic, but poor execution often creates much deeper business damage. Beyond money, what hidden costs do businesses often overlook?
There's the hidden cost of the human beings, right? You and I work for a company, and if the project goes over budget or behind schedule, well, guess what? We're going to have to put more. We're either going to have to crash the schedule to put more people on it uh, to get back on schedule again. All right. So now I've got the hidden cost of well, I've got more human capital costs going in here. Then there's the time factor. Okay, if a project is behind schedule and I have to pull resources from another project or another part of my company, something's going to suffer. Okay, but I've had to pull you, say, onto this project. Now, whatever you're on suffers. That's a hidden cost, and a lot of companies don't think that. Well, I can just borrow Ethan for 3 days. Sure, you can. But Ethan's on that project over there, and that's got a timeline and a budget. So now you've just hurt this other project that the Ethan is on. And then the other hidden cost is on the capital side. If you don't plan well enough for what your resources are, people, well, I know Ethan, I know all these resources from the human side I need. But if you don't put enough effort into, well, what do I need from a capital goods standpoint? Is there a certain piece of machinery? Do I have to outsource something to a vendor that doesn't have that because I don't have the wherewithal to do things. And now if things go awry, now I'm going to depend more on that vendor, perhaps, which means more money, right? So there's always a hidden cost.
I liked what you said about the people and the time. I think that the biggest damage that doesn't even show is often not going to be on the spreadsheet right away.
Right. And the funny thing is, and I experienced it with one client, they had finished the project and they had billed the customer. And the engineering manager came in after the customer paid the bill and said, "Oh, by the way, I had to add 2 more bodies on this IT program that I didn't account for, and I didn't put into the final project accounting." Now they've got to go back to the customer and explain that. Now, most customers have a rational uh, way of looking at things. But bottom line is, if I'm the customer, I'm not obligated. I paid you. Now you're telling me you incurred additional costs. One, without telling me when that happened, and two, you want me to pay for that now. But I'm sort of paying for your mistake. That does not bode well for customer confidence.
When you step into a struggling organization, what's usually the first deeper issue you uncover?
Well, when I step into a troubled organization, which is usually a troubled project, the first thing I want to learn is what was the original plan? Show me the original plan. I want to see the scope. I want to see the schedule, the budget. I want to see your resource planning, your risk planning. I want to see your quality planning. I want to know who the stakeholders are. What did you plan for up front? Now, next piece of data. Where are we today in each one of those categories? And why do you think, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, you're in this predicament? And I ask that question of the leadership, and I ask it of the people where there's boots on the ground, because what I'm looking for is, are these guys calibrated about what's really going on here? Or does leadership think this, but the people who's actually doing the work think this? Now I know I've got a gap. I've got to identify why that gap is there. But once I can identify plan state versus current state, what the gaps are, then I can begin to bring the parties together to look at root cause and root cause corrective action.
Richard, being in the AI space, with how quickly AI and technology are moving, I'm noticing that many businesses are aggressively chasing the innovation, but sometimes at the cost of operational discipline. How do strong leaders balance innovation with adopting new tech
Right.
without letting foundational execution break
Well,
down?
that's an excellent question, because as you know, AI is coming on strong and fast, not just in project management, but it's in product development. It's in everything right now. And we have to be careful, I think, with AI, because it is a very good tool, but it's how you use the tool. It's no different, than anything else in life. How you use the tool and the quality of the inputs to that tool will dictate the outputs from that tool. So, for instance, I've had a client that was putting together a project plan. I got called in, and because the plan was marginal, and one of the areas was in budgeting. And so I asked the client, I said, "How did you come up with your budget?" And I was told, "Well, I programmed into Claude my project. I explained the project. I explained the duration. I explained how many people were on the project. I explained all the tasks and activities. And Claude came back and said, okay, you do need these resources, maybe a couple others, but this is what your project should cost you." And he said, that's the number I went with. I went, well, okay, that was one data point that you got from Claude, but it's only a data point. It has no humanistic input to it. I asked, did you take that number from Claude? Did you sit down with your project team and ask them to look at that number, but also have them do a bottoms up roll up to say, well, if we had to do a roll up from the bottoms up to figure this out, how close is it to the number that Claude gave us? I was like, no, I didn't do that. I just went with that number. I said, well, again, AI is great, but it's a data point. In the case of cost, a resource, it's a data point. Okay. And you just can't take that as the sole data point. And that's the danger to me of AI right now with a lot of small to medium sized companies. They love it. You can get plans and SOPs and written very quickly, but it's data. You have to interpret that data. You have to color that data to make sure that what you've got, what it's giving you, is realistic or not realistic. And also, as we both know, AI can make assumptions that you didn't even think it could make, but it will make it. And that's why you have to review the data that you have. So I'm all for AI. I'm all for the inclusion of AI into what I do for a living. But I caution my clients, you have to look at that as one data point and then validate, is that data point the data point you want to go ahead with? You should do more due diligence.
Yeah, and I was just about to say that, without the discipline underneath it, it can actually create more instability, right?
Right.
Especially when it comes to something like planning an entire
Mhm.
project. Let's say it takes, resources, right? If you're building a house or something, what's the cost of lumber in your specific
Right.
area? Are you going to get a general number for it, the entire country that you're in, or things like that? So you can definitely plan things like that, but it absolutely needs the human factor of, actually breaking it down and how did we get to this number, and then talking with experts that can, help solve
Right.
and get you close to your goals there.
Right. And if you can find a subject matter expert, you talked about building the house. I know of a company down here that's building single family homes, and they use AI to figure out the cost of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with these different amenities. But, they also have experts on staff that will look at whatever AI gives them and adjust accordingly because they're more adept at knowing what is the current cost of lumber, of, PVC piping, of wire and things of that nature. So again, you're going to get a good data point, but it's a data point. You have to validate that data point.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Where do businesses most commonly over-prioritize new tools while neglecting the core systems needed for consistent, predictable results?
So you're asking where one would have a tendency to over prioritize?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think from what I'm seeing in small to medium-sized companies, they're over prioritizing the data that they're getting out of scope management, and they're over prioritizing the data they're getting out of risk management. And when I say over prioritizing, they're accepting the information that's coming to them from the AI source, and they're saying that's gospel. And I'm saying, no, that's not gospel. That's data, that's information, and you need to step back. And in project management, it's scope, schedule, budget, risk. Those are the main ones where if you're going to use an AI tool, you better not over prioritize. You better use AI to get a feel for the field of vision that you're looking for, and then use that as a data point with your company's knowledge or with subject matter experts that can get you to the point that you want to be at with regard to information to plan.
I feel like the real issue often isn't the tool itself, but just whether the system behind it actually works. The inefficiencies, just whether it's accurate, right? Using the example of people planning an entire project with AI itself.
And it's the prompting too, right? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. A single prompt can give you different
Yeah.
results every
I
time.
mean, my dad used to say to my brothers and I, if you put crap in, crap's coming out. So a lot of so when I ask about how did you prompt for this, and they're fairly simplistic, what is the price of P13 steel in Toledo, Ohio? Well, that's Toledo, Ohio, but you don't buy it in Toledo, Ohio. You're buying it from Georgia. You're buying it from California. You're buying it from China. Okay. So, you could have done a much better prompting job on that to figure out what the price of tool steel was.
But when companies invest heavily into software for growth but still struggle, what's the first thing you look at to see if they're building a truly predictable client acquisition system?
Well, the first thing I look at from the project side is what are you using? Number one, ChatGPT, Claude. If you're doing deep research, Notebook LM, or if you're in PMI Infinity, what is the tool you're using, and what are you asking of this tool, and how are you asking that tool? I want to make sure that at least they've got the right tools and they're asking the right questions of those tools. So that's the first thing. The other thing is I look at the number of tools, right? I did work with a company that had, they were using Jira for one group. They were using Microsoft Scheduler for another group, and they were using Monday.com for another. Now, this is the same company, 3 different product divisions. And, I said, you've got 3 nice software programs here for 3 different divisions, but really you're just confusing the system because the same engineers are working basically, they were cross-pollinating between groups. I said, so I have to learn Jira, I have to learn Monday.com, and I have to learn MS Schedule. You know how many hours a day that takes out from me from doing my engineering work? I mean, on average, the engineers were spending 2 to 3 hours a day in software. I said, that's not what an engineer should be doing. They should be designing, they should be testing, they should be implementing. So, you have to look at what tools, how are they using those tools, the quality of the inputs to the quality of the outputs, and what tools are really required. I'm pretty simplistic. Use what the project calls for, nothing more, nothing less. If you can get away with, Monday.com versus MS Schedule, and it's easier to use, then just use Monday.com. Don't put people in this huge learning curve. People want to be productive, not overly stressed.
Just to clarify something, I don't know if I heard you right, but did you say that learning some of these tools was taking time away from you to do the engineering side, or were you using an example
That
of
is an
someone else?
example of the people at that company. So I'm an engineer within that company, but I've got to learn 3 different software programs because I'm cross-pollinated across these 3 product groups. So I'm spending 2 to 3 hours a day, even with help from the IT department, to figure, well, how do I use Monday.com? How do I use Jira? I've never used Jira before. Gee, I know Microsoft Project, but they want Microsoft Schedule. So how do I use Microsoft Schedule? So, it's 2 to 3 hours of people just trying to learn software. So there's what, 6 or 7 hours where I'm not being very productive. I'm trying to learn something.
Richard, this is a tough one, but I think it's an important one. When should a company kill a project, and why do so many wait too long?
I believe a company should kill a project if it's clearly evident that they are not going to reach their intended objective. The objective they're going to get out of the project will not satisfy, in total, the client's expectations for delivery. A lot of projects will get behind schedule and over budget. If they're grossly over schedule, behind schedule, over budget, the questions that are asked are, can you descope this project? What do you mean? Well, you want to deliver 12 things here and you only got so much time left. I believe you can deliver 6. Are those 6 things what's called the minimal viable product that your customer would accept? And then when we can deliver that, then we can discuss maybe another project or the next phase of a project to get to the other 6 things they wanted. If the answer is that's not a minimal viable product and it never will be, then you're really wasting your time, your money, and your people. And your customer's not going to be happy. So you might as well just admit it's not going to work out. Now, why don't they kill? To me, it's just pure desire to forge forward and hope that the best outcome will come. And, that's great, but that's never the case. The customer will be disappointed. And it's just not worth taking that abuse. It's just not.
I agree with you there. I thought that was pretty powerful what you said about, pushing forward. I think sometimes discipline means knowing when to stop and not just when to push harder. And like you said, the results that you're delivering for the client is just, or the customer, if it's just not there, that's not going to be worth it. If you had just 30 days to stabilize a failing project, where would your focus go first?
As I said, I would first focus on what was planned and what is current state. I want to understand what all the disconnects are. Secondly, I want to understand those disconnects. Does leadership and the people who are doing the work see it? Because if they're not, that's the first area that needs to be addressed is, well, look, leadership thinks it's this. You're saying it's that. We need to close this gap because if we don't close the gap, no one in this equation is going to get satisfied. Once we understand what that gap is and what needs to be accomplished, and what both parties, meaning the customer and my client, are willing to accept at that point as far as deliverables and timing, now we can start to put in root cause and root cause corrective actions. Anything else is noise. Anything else is pure noise. We're not listening to noise. And we're going to calibrate now because we're in what I call DEFCON mode. We're going to calibrate every day where we stand. At the beginning of the day, we're going to get together and say, what did we accomplish yesterday? What are we going to accomplish today? Why do we do that? Because now we're behind schedule, we're over budget, customers waiting for something. We need now to put a heightened awareness into what we're doing at the beginning and end of every day. And it's also important because if there was a gap between leadership and the workers, now I got to keep these 2 calibrated. All right. And I got to get leadership to understand these are the people, these are your boots on the ground. They are the ones that should know what the issues are and how to resolve them. You need to calibrate with these people. You may have your opinion, but this is your engine that's going to get it done. So I need to keep you 2 calibrated.
You've told us a few stories of past clients that you've had. I am curious to hear of the story that you've had with a client who came to you with a project that was seriously off track, and I'm really curious to know what changed once you stepped in.
My team and I worked on a project for a major producer of building and construction materials, windows, roofing, vinyl siding, and they were purchased by private equity and they were struggling with not just project management as a process and a vehicle of delivery. They were struggling to get product to market. They hadn't brought any new products to market in several years, and their products were sold through big box stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, companies like that. And when we first stepped in there, we saw there was no governance. But what do you mean by governance? Well, the company didn't have what we called a product governance. What is it that you want of your products? What must they accomplish? Why must they accomplish this? And, yeah, they know it's vinyl siding and it has insulation behind it and it has to have an art factor, but it was very project by project specific. Well, what's the big picture here? Because, the market is this big, but you're going for the sliver of the pie. Do you really understand what the sliver of the pie is asking of you? So we had to first get them to think about a product strategy. What is it today and 5 years from now? What type of products you want to bring to market? Where's your governance? And what are the type of requirements and specifications, whether it be local, state, or federal, that you have to comply to? Then the next thing was project governance. They didn't have project governance. When you say, well, what's that? Well, once you understand what your product governance is, how you run projects must support that. That's project governance. So, were they doing scoping? Not very well. How were they doing budget planning? Well, the last two projects like that, yeah, let's go with that. How were they doing scheduling? Well, one group had this software, one group had this software, and that software. So, we saw all these disconnections. So the first thing we walked in, we said, okay, look, now you know your product governance, project governance. Now you're saying you will commit to scope planning, budget planning, resource planning, risk planning. They didn't do any risk planning whatsoever. So we got them onto what I call a project management discipline. We gave them that governance, and that governance went across all the three different product groups. So we got the company calibrated about how they wanted to move forward in total. And that was key, because without product and project governance, you're basically just going on a project by project or a situation by situation scenario. And that's not going to get you where you want to go. That you'll make money, yeah, but you won't make the kind of money and have the type of competitive differentiation that you would like to have in the marketplace. So that was a pretty big thing, by getting them to understand those two governances and then to put it in. And then they hired a gentleman that had prior project management office experience, and we worked with that gentleman to write the standard operating procedures. How do you do scope? How do you do budget? How do you do resource planning? How do you do risk planning? So that you or I, as new engineers to the company, the document was right there of what we had to follow. And the documents are very clear and concise. That was a pretty big project. It was a very rewarding project to see this company flourish once they got hold of the two things.
I bet it was. The real world example is huge because it shows what exactly changes when the root problems get solved. Richard, we are getting a little short for time here. I do have a couple more questions, but what was the true root cause that you felt out of that example, and what surprised the client most about the fix?
The true root cause was the company had been bought by a private equity firm. It was the third private equity firm that had purchased that company in 6 or 7 years. They, in typical private equity fashion, they wanted to build the company up, make it profitable, and then sell it. So I think the aha moment for them is the only way you're going to get to that point is to put in the disciplines of product and project governance, to have those, the standard operating procedures, to standardize everything, because that reduces risk, it reduces waste, and it certainly reduces costs. And I think the other aha moment was once they grabbed it, they were able, and as I said, they hadn't brought new products to market in several years. I think it was about 5 years. Well, within 8 months, they had several new products that hit the market and did very well. So what we asked them to do, manifested in money, new product sales to new product, and I think that's when, for at least the leadership, it was the aha moment of, yep, we were missing this all along.
Richard, just getting back on the topic of AI, with AI and automation and growing business complexity. Do you think project inefficiencies are getting better or worse?
Well, that's an excellent question. I have caution when I answer this. My caution is this: AI has made it very easy for an engineer or a project manager or a product manager to go in and get deep research and find out just about anything they want to about a product or service or whatever. I'm starting to see in the small to medium sized companies, and I think it's because they don't have the same level of project management discipline or product management discipline as a big Fortune 500 company, a dependence on AI to the point where whatever AI will give them, they will go with, believing that I believe I've given AI all the information it needs. I believe what it's given back to me what I need. That scares me. That scares me for two reasons. One, it's one data point. Good data point, but one data point. Two, there are people within these companies that have a lot of experience, that have lived through a lot of the good, rough, and non-optimal times of the company and product development, product development. You need those voices. They are the ones that can take that one data point from AI and help validate it, recreate it, improve upon it, and in some cases, yeah, I can accept that. That's roughly where it is. That's what scares me. They don't go back in for the human voice all the time. They go for the AI voice because it's convenient. I mean, you can write now a project management plan in less than 5 minutes in AI, where when I grew up, it was a 3 or 4 day affair. But that doesn't mean what AI gives me for a project management plan is totally correct. To our earlier conversation, you and I need to go in and validate that. We need to look at that. Is what you gave me back really relevant to the situation here? And that's what scares me.
I think that while technology can absolutely help, I think that, it can also magnify weak systems if businesses aren't careful. Where do you personally see the biggest opportunity for AI to improve execution, operational predictability, or even the consistent business growth?
Well, I think AI, if I'm looking at operational efficiency, which I think project management goes under, I think it helps those that don't have a deep project management experience. I think it gives them the framework with which to accomplish their goals and objectives. If you properly prompt in, this is what I want to accomplish, this is why I want to accomplish, this is the value I believe it will create. These are the assumptions and constraints behind what I'm trying to do. And if you want to go even further, this is the time I've got to get it done in. This is the budget I've been handed. And any other relevant information that you think AI would need, I think it will give you a very solid framework. It's a framework. It's like a coloring book, right? It gives you the lines to color. Now you've got to go back and take what it's told you and color in the lines as it relates to your company, your customer, your product that you're trying to develop, the assumptions and constraints that you have around that project. If you take that solid framework and know how to color, I think you're going to be very happy with the results that you'll get. And I do think it's getting stronger every day. AI is getting stronger every day. The capacity of AI to learn. So it's just going to get better and better, but it's only as good as we utilize it.
Yeah, I think, we're still a little early in AI. Absolutely has made a difference for a lot of people, but as far as trusting it, wholeheartedly, definitely a lot of improvement, especially when it comes to, using it for such large things like planning an entire project like that. Rich, I got one last one for you today before we wrap up this episode. If business leaders wanted to proactively improve predictability today, before major failures happen, what's the single most impactful place they should look instead of look inside their business before they, want to build a more predictable engine?
If having run companies myself, if a leader of a company really wants to continually improve, not just him or herself, but their company, the first place I think they need to look is at themselves. They have to have a clear vision for what they want, why they want it, the value it's going to create, and the resources required to reach that goal or objective. They need to understand that first. They need to be able to clearly articulate that to their people and make sure that their people can embrace that and understand the whys and the wherefores and the how comes. Once they do that and they want to start whatever they want to undertake, they have to stay connected to their people. There is nothing worse than you or I as a business leader who go to someone and say, "You're the project. I want you to sponsor a project. I want you to do X, Y, and Z," and then we go away. This is not the army where you, as my commanding officer, can tell me, "Get your men together and go out and do this." This is business. This is people. This is not militaristic. It's very human orientated. Projects are done by people for people, and it starts at the top. They need to stay connected to their people and their project teams. They need to stay calibrated with what's going on. If they do that, there'll be no surprises or, "Oh, what the heck is going on here?" type scenarios. And it will also show their people that they care, assuming they support their people. It will also empower their people to become more accountable and show more ownership for what needs to be done because they feel that their leadership is connected to them. That is one of the biggest disconnects that I still see today. And it needs to be addressed. And when I talk to the leadership of companies, whether it's at the school where I teach or I get called in to talk, is you have a fiduciary responsibility to your company, but you're more importantly, you have a human responsibility to your people to have them clearly understand where you want to lead this company, why, for what reasons, and you need to make sure that they fully understand you so they can embrace you. And if they embrace you and you support them, they will be accountable and they will show the ownership that you want to see from your employees.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Richard, this has been incredibly helpful to get a big idea of the bigger picture here, your knowledge into why projects fail and where businesses lose predictability, and how stronger systems create better outcomes has been incredibly valuable. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Operator Lab and sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much for having me, Ethan. Been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. And anyone that's wanting to get connected with you or wants to learn more about your business, how can they get in contact with you or do some more research for themselves?
They can get me at www.truenorthpmpconsulting.com. They can get me through my LinkedIn, which is, I think it's www.linkedin.com/in/Richard Broo, BROO. Be more than happy to talk to any one of your listeners and if I can be of service, it would be my pleasure.
Absolutely. And for anyone wanting to get connected with Richard or his company, we will make sure that we have the links provided with that. Richard, thank you so much for your time today.
Ethan, thank you.